Imagine a royal bloodline so incestuous, so folded in on itself, that its family tree looked more like a tangled wreath. For centuries, one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, the House of Habsburg, practiced rampant inbreeding to consolidate power, creating a genetic time bomb. And that bomb finally detonated in the 19th century, in the form of a king whose physical deformities were just the horrifying prelude to the destruction he would bring upon his own nation. This isn't just the story of a so-called deformed king. It's the story of how one man's inherited cursed jaw so pronounced he struggled to eat and speak became a symbol for a broken monarchy and dragged an entire empire into an age of chaos, betrayal, and bloody civil war. This is the tragic and terrible reign of Ferdinand VII of Spain, the king they called the Desired, who would go down in history as the felon king. Before the monster, there was the myth. Born in 1784, Ferdinand VII entered a Spain in turmoil. His father, King Charles IV, was a weak and indecisive ruler, widely seen as a puppet for his powerful and controversial prime minister, Manuel Godoy. The Spanish people, tired of corruption and foreign influence, looked to the young prince as a beacon of hope. They called him El Deseado, the Desired One. He was supposed to be the savior who would restore Spain's honor and strength. Artists painted him as a handsome and noble figure, a classical hero ready to claim his destiny. This image was pure propaganda. From a young age, the whispers in the court were about his appearance. He had inherited the curse of his family in its full, undeniable glory. But for a populace desperate for a hero, the reality was a truth they weren't yet ready to see. They projected all their hopes and dreams onto him, creating a legend that the real Ferdinand could never, and would never, live up to. To understand Ferdinand, you have to understand his blood. The Spanish Habsburgs and their successors, the Bourbons, were notorious for marrying within the family. Uncles married nieces, and first cousins married first cousins for generations. This wasn't for love, it was a cold, hard political calculation to keep power and territory consolidated within a single lineage. But genetics is a cruel bookkeeper. With each generation of inbreeding, the chances of harmful recessive genes expressing themselves skyrocketed. Think of it like this: if a harmful gene is a rare bad card in a deck, two unrelated people are unlikely to both pass that same bad card to their child. But if the parents are cousins, they're drawing from a very similar, much smaller deck. The odds of them both holding and passing on that same bad card increase dramatically. For Ferdinand's ancestors, this resulted in a host of medical issues, high infant mortality, and the most infamous family trait in European history, the Habsburg jaw. Ferdinand VII was the culmination of this centuries-long genetic experiment gone horribly wrong. His father and mother were uncle and niece, but the connections went far deeper, weaving a web of consanguinity that was among the most extreme in royal history. The Habsburg jaw, known clinically as mandibular prognathism, was the signature family flaw. It's a condition where the lower jaw grows much faster and larger than the upper jaw, resulting in a severe underbite. This wasn't just a cosmetic issue. For its most afflicted members, like Ferdinand's ancestor Charles II, it made life a living hell. Chewing food was a monumental effort, speaking clearly was nearly impossible, and constant drooling was a common side effect. Ferdinand VII inherited this in spades. Contemporary accounts describe him as having a long, melancholic face dominated by the bulbous Bourbon nose and the jutting, oversized jaw of his Habsburg forebears. His lower lip was said to be thick and perpetually hanging open. This physical reality had profound psychological effects. He was known to be sullen, suspicious, and deeply insecure, traits likely exacerbated by a lifetime of being stared at and knowing he was physically abnormal. His face was a constant, public reminder of his family's tainted blood, and it isolated him, fueling a paranoia that would later define his disastrous reign. Ferdinand's personal weaknesses made him an easy target for one of history's greatest manipulators, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1808, seeing the Spanish monarchy in disarray, Napoleon intervened. He lured Ferdinand and his father, Charles IV, to Bayonne, France, under the guise of mediation. It was a trap. In what became known as the abdications of Bayonne, Napoleon forced both father and son to renounce their claims to the Spanish throne. He then installed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as the new king of Spain. Ferdinand, the so-called desired one, spent the next 6 years as a prisoner in a luxurious French chateau. But this was no defiant captive. He lived a life of leisure, writing sycophantic, begging letters to Napoleon, congratulating him on his victories against Ferdinand's own people, and even requesting to be adopted as Napoleon's son. While back in Spain, citizens were fighting and dying in his name during the brutal Peninsular War. Their desired king was trying to marry into the Bonaparte family. This period revealed his true character, not a noble hero, but a cowardly, self-serving opportunist devoid of principle. When Napoleon's empire crumbled in 1814, Ferdinand VII was restored to the Spanish throne. The people rejoiced. The guerrilla fighters who had bled for him, and the liberal politicians who had drafted a progressive constitution in 1812 in his absence, believed their hero had returned. They were catastrophically wrong. Ferdinand's first act upon returning was to tear up that constitution. He declared it null and void, rounded up the liberal leaders who had championed it, and had them arrested, exiled, or executed. He completely rejected the idea of a constitutional monarchy and restored absolute, divine right rule with a vengeance. He unleashed a brutal period of repression known as the ominous Decade, reinstating the Spanish Inquisition and using a secret police force to crush any and all dissent. The man they had called El Deseado had shown his true colors. He had betrayed the very people who had fought for his crown. From that moment on, he would earn a new, more fitting nickname, El Rey Fel and the Felon King. For an absolute monarch, the single most important duty is to produce a male heir to continue the dynasty. For Ferdinand, this became a desperate, humiliating obsession, plagued by the genetic curse of his ancestors. He married 4 times in his quest for a son. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily, was his first cousin. Their marriage was loveless and fraught with political intrigue. She suffered 2 miscarriages and died at 21, childless. His second wife, Maria Isabel of Portugal, was his own niece. She died giving birth to their only child, a daughter who herself lived for only a few months. His third wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, was deeply pious and reportedly horrified by the physical act of consummating the marriage, leading to extreme difficulty. After 10 years, she also died childless. 3 wives, a decade of trying, and still no heir. The court whispered that the Habsburg curse had rendered him impotent or infertile. His physical deformities were now seen as an outward sign of a deeper, dynastic failure. He was failing at his most fundamental kingly duty, and the future of the Spanish throne hung precariously in the balance. Modern science can now put a number on the Habsburgs' folly. Researchers at the University of Santiago de Compostela studied 3 generations of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty and calculated what is known as the inbreeding coefficient, F. This coefficient measures the probability that an individual will inherit 2 identical copies of a gene from an ancestor on both their mother's and father's side. For a child of first cousins, the inbreeding coefficient is 0.625. For Ferdinand's ancestor, Charles II, it was a staggering 0.254 higher than the offspring of a brother-sister pairing. While Ferdinand was a Bourbon, his lineage was deeply intertwined with this Habsburg heritage. The high level of homozygosity, having 2 identical copies of genes, dramatically increased the chances of genetic disorders, infertility, and stillbirths. The curse wasn't supernatural, it was a predictable, biological catastrophe written in their DNA. Ferdinand's desperate struggle for an heir wasn't just bad luck, it was the inevitable genetic bill coming due after centuries of reckless inbreeding. Finally, with his 4th wife, another niece, Maria Cristina of the 2 Sicilies, Ferdinand succeeded. But he didn't get the son he craved. He had 2 daughters, the eldest being Isabella. Here was the final, critical problem. Spain had long operated under Salic law, which forbade women from inheriting the throne if there were other male relatives in the bloodline. Ferdinand's younger brother, Carlos, was waiting eagerly in the wings, fully expecting to be king. Ferdinand, however, doted on his daughter Isabella. In 1830, just before her birth, he issued a pragmatic sanction, a decree that unilaterally revoked Salic law and allowed his daughter to succeed him. This single act tore the country in two. The ultra-conservative faction, who despised Ferdinand's slightly more moderate wife and saw his brother Carlos as the true heir to absolutist rule, were outraged. When Ferdinand died in 1833, his 3-year-old daughter was declared Queen Isabella II. Her uncle Carlos immediately declared himself the rightful king, and Spain plunged into the First Carlist War, a brutal civil conflict that would haunt the nation for decades. The felon king's final act was to ensure his country would bleed long after he was gone. Ferdinand VII's reign was an unmitigated disaster for Spain. He inherited an empire and left behind a fractured, warring nation. Under his rule, nearly all of Spain's colonies in the Americas fought for and won their independence, draining the country of immense wealth and prestige. His political betrayals fostered a deep-seated cynicism and division between liberals and conservatives that would define Spanish politics for over a century, culminating in the even more horrific Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. He was a king who represented the very worst of his lineage, the paranoia, the selfishness, the absolutism, and the tragic physical consequences of a cursed bloodline. He was desired, he was despised, and in the end, his legacy was one of ruin. So, was Ferdinand VII a victim of his own genetics, a man doomed from birth by the sins of his ancestors? Or was he a malicious, cruel tyrant who consciously chose betrayal and repression at every turn? Perhaps the most terrifying answer is that he was both. A broken man who, in turn, broke his own kingdom. The story of the felon king is a chilling reminder that the pursuit of pure blood can lead to the most impure of consequences, where a single family's curse can become a nation's tragedy. What do you think? Was Ferdinand a product of his circumstances, or was he truly a villain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this dive into royal history fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories from the dark corners of the past, and share this video with anyone who loves a good historical tragedy. Thanks for watching.